Let's dive into the fascinating and often bewildering world of Eugène Ionesco, one of the founding figures of modern absurdist theatre. He was born in 1909 in Romania, but spent much of his life in France, writing primarily in French, and this linguistic detail has been asked in exam. Ionesco became one of the leading voices of 20th century French avant-garde theatre, a title that has also been mentioned in exam. His works broke every rule of traditional drama, rejecting logic, realism, and character development. Instead, he created what he called anti-plays works that revealed the meaninglessness of human communication and existence. His first and most famous anti-play, The Bald Soprano, written in 1950, is often considered the very beginning of the theatre of the absurd, and that fact has been asked in exam. Inspired by the mechanical dialogues of a language textbook, the play shows two couples, the Smiths and the Martins, engaged in completely nonsensical conversations. They speak in clichés, repeat themselves endlessly, and contradict one another. Soon the maid Mary and her lover, the fire chief, enter, adding even more confusion. The fire chief complains that there are no fires to put out, a symbolic comment on how human action and purpose have become empty routines. The chaos builds until it ends exactly where it began, with the opening dialogue repeated, suggesting that life itself might be an endless, meaningless loop. It's a funny yet disturbing picture of how people talk without truly communicating. The play became a modern classic and still holds the record as one of the longest-running shows in theatre history. Through works like The Bald Soprano, The Lesson, and The Chairs, Ionesco captured the essence of absurdism, a movement closely tied to Albert Camus' philosophical idea that life has no inherent meaning, yet we must continue to seek one. Ionesco's influence only grew stronger through the 1950s and 60s. His most famous full-length play, Rhinoceros, published in 1959, has been asked in exam and remains one of the defining works of modern drama. Now, this play begins in an ordinary small town where, quite suddenly, a rhinoceros runs through the streets. At first, people are shocked. But soon, the townspeople themselves begin to transform into rhinoceroses one by one until only the central character, Berenger, remains human. Berenger isn't a hero in the traditional sense. He's lazy, often drunk, and full of self-doubt. But as everyone around him, including his friend Jean, succumbs to the transformation, Berenger becomes the last defender of individuality and reason. This extraordinary transformation symbolizes the rise of fascism and Nazism before World War II, when entire societies abandoned reason to follow destructive collective ideologies. The play's themes of conformity, mob mentality, and personal responsibility continue to resonate even today. By the final scene, Berenger stands alone, torn between despair and courage, shouting that he will not surrender. It's one of the most powerful moments in modern theatre, a cry for integrity in a world that demands obedience. Beyond his plays, Ionesco's achievements were widely recognized. He became a member of the Académie Française in 1970, received the Austrian State Prize for Literature the same year, and won the Jerusalem Prize in 1973 for his contributions to world literature. Some of his other notable works include Amédée, or How to Get Rid of It, The Killer, Exit the King, Hunger and Thirst, and Macbeth, each expanding on his recurring themes of death, decay, and absurdity. Ionesco continued writing and reflecting on human existence until his death in 1994, leaving behind a body of work that revolutionized the way we think about theatre. In a sense, Eugène Ionesco transformed the stage into a mirror of human confusion, a place where logic collapses, words lose meaning, and yet the struggle for understanding goes on. His plays remind us that even in absurdity there is truth, and even in chaos there is the echo of human longing. Let's turn to one of the most provocative and unconventional figures in 20th century European literature, Jean Genet. Genet's life reads like a novel in itself, full of rebellion, artistry, and reinvention. He was born in 1910 in France and lived a childhood marked by abandonment and crime. At just 10 years old, he was caught stealing and sent to the Mettray Reform School, a harsh institution that would later inspire his semi-autobiographical work, Miracle of the Rose. Genet's early life as a tramp, pickpocket, and thief gave him the raw material for his writing. His thief's journal captures this wandering criminal existence across the streets of Barcelona, Antwerp, and other European cities, where he lived among the outcasts and the marginalized. In these experiences, he found both humiliation and beauty, transforming the obscene and the forbidden into something strangely poetic. He was a criminal turned writer, and that remarkable transformation has been mentioned in exam. Genet's genius lay in turning the language of crime, desire, and guilt into art-making, eroticism, and blasphemy part of his poetic vision. His writing wasn't meant to comfort. It was meant to disturb, to shock, and to reveal society's hidden hypocrisies. In 1947, Genet wrote Funeral Rites and Querelle of Brest, both continuing his exploration of love, betrayal, and taboo desire. His plays such as Death Watch, The Maids, The Balcony, and The Blacks would later make him a major force in the theatre of the absurd, where he stood alongside Beckett and Ionesco. His dramatic style also showed traces of Jean-Paul Sartre's influence, especially in its philosophical structure and moral confrontation. In The Maids, Genet dissected the psychology of identity and role-playing, showing how people perform power and submission. In The Balcony and The Blacks, he used striking expressionist techniques to expose political oppression and human complicity. His theatre became what he called the theatre of hatred, a stage where audiences were forced to confront their own guilt and voyeurism. Now, one of Genet's most famous works, and one that has been asked in exam, is Our Lady of the Flowers, first published anonymously in 1943. He wrote this novel while he was in prison for burglary, crafting it secretly on stolen scraps of paper. Later, it was published under his own name in 1944, with a definitive French edition appearing in 1951. The story centers on Divine, a flamboyant drag queen who was mythically canonized after death. Around Divine orbit a cast of criminals, lovers, and misfits, including Darling, Daintyfoot, and a murderer named Our Lady of the Flowers. Within this strange world of the underworld, Genet redefines sin, betrayal, and sexuality. The book's narrator writes from prison, inventing stories to pass the time and perhaps to survive psychologically. In doing so, he turns erotic fantasy into spiritual creation. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre famously described Our Lady of the Flowers as the epic of masturbation, a phrase that captures both the book's shocking candor and its introspective power. Sartre and Jean Cocteau, recognizing Genet's brilliance, intervened to secure his presidential pardon, rescuing him from a lifetime in prison. From that point on, Genet became an emblem of rebellion turned art, a man who used language to transform degradation into beauty. His works blur the lines between crime and art, shame and pride, life and performance. Whether he wrote about thieves, prisoners, or drag queens, Genet gave voice to the voiceless and turned moral transgression into poetry. Jean Genet died in 1986, but his influence endures in theatre, in queer literature, and in modern philosophy. His life itself became a performance, an act of defiance against conformity. So, when you remember Genet, remember him not just as a writer, but as a man who proved that even within the walls of a prison cell, the human imagination can be utterly free.